Bible reading before the sermon this hour will be out of 1 Samuel chapter 12, verses 7 through 12. If you're following along in one of the Bibles you can find at your seat there, it's going to be out of pages 276 and into 277. Now therefore stand still, that I may reason with you before the Lord concerning all the righteous acts of the Lord, which he did to you and your fathers, when Jacob had gone into Egypt, and your fathers cried out to the Lord. Then the Lord sent Moses and Aaron, who brought your fathers out of Egypt and made them dwell in this place. And when they forgot the Lord their God, he sold them into the hand of Sisera, commander of the army of Hazor, into the hand of the Philistines and into the hand of the king of Moab, and they fought against them. Then they cried out to the Lord and said, We have sinned, because we have forsaken the Lord and served the Baals and the Ashtaroths. But now deliver us from the hand of our enemies, and we will serve you. And the Lord sent Jerubbabel, Bedan, Jephthah, and out of the hand of your enemies on every side, and you dwelt in safety. And when you saw that Nahash, king of the Ammonites, came against you, you said to me, No, but a king shall reign over us, when the Lord your God was your king.
Good morning. Thank you guys for being here. Whether you're a member here or visiting with us this morning, your presence is very much appreciated, especially sticking around until the 11 o'clock hour. Is really encouraging, and I'm glad that we get to spend this time together, encouraging one another, edifying one another, studying God's Word together. It's important. You can turn your Bibles to Hebrews chapter 10. Hebrews chapter 10 is where we'll begin reading this morning. We are continuing this morning our study through the chapter of Hebrews, chapter 11, which discusses various individuals throughout biblical history who were full of faith and did faithful acts in the sight of the Lord. And we haven't, I feel, for a little while gone back and read the whole chapter. And so I'd like to do that. I'd like to start at the beginning of Hebrews in chapter 1, but we'll start in Hebrews chapter 10, and we'll start at verse 35. Therefore, do not throw away that confidence of yours, which has a great reward. For you have need of endurance, so that when you have done the will of God, you may receive the promise. For yet in a very little while, he who is coming will come, and will not delay. But my righteous one shall live by faith. And if he shrinks back, my soul has no pleasure in him. But we are not of those who shrink back to destruction, but of those who have faith to the persevering of the soul. Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. For by it the men of old gained approval. By faith we understand that the worlds were prepared by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things which are visible. But by faith Abel offered to God a better sacrifice than Cain, through which he was approved as being righteous, God approving his gifts. And through faith, though he is dead, he still speaks. By faith Enoch was taken up, so that he would not see death, and he was not found because God took him up. For prior to being taken up, he was approved as being pleasing to God. And without faith it is impossible to please him. For he who draws near to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who seek him. By faith Noah, being warned about things not yet seen, in reverence prepared an ark for the salvation of his household, by which he condemned the world, and became an heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. By faith Abraham, when he was called, obeyed, by going out to a place for which he was to receive as an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. By faith he sojourned in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, fellow heirs of the same promise. For he was looking for a city which has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. By faith even Sarah herself received ability to conceive even beyond the proper time of life, since she regarded him faithful who had promised. Therefore they were born even of one man, and him as good as dead, as many as the stars of heaven in number, and innumerable as the sand which is by the seashore. All these died in faith, without receiving the promises. But having seen them, and having welcomed them off from a distance, and having confessed that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. For those who say such things make it clear that they are seeking a country of their own. And indeed, if they had been remembering that country from which they went out, they would have had opportunity to return. But now they aspire to a better country, that is, a heavenly one. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he prepared a city for them. By faith Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was offering up his only son, to whom it was said, In Isaac your seed shall be called. He considered that God is able to raise people even from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he also received him back. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau, even regarding things to come. By faith, Jacob, as he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph and worshipped, leaning on his staff. By faith, Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the exodus of the sons of Israel and gave commands concerning his bones. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents, because they saw he was a beautiful child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, regarding the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing the rage of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is unseen. By faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, so that he who destroyed the firstborn would not touch them. By faith they passed through the Red Sea, as though they were passing through dry land. And the Egyptians, when they attempted it, were drowned. By faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days. By faith Rahab the harlot did not perish along with those who were disobedient, after welcoming the spies in peace. And what more shall I say? For time will fail me if I recount Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, as well as David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, performed righteousness, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong from weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received back their dead by resurrection, and others were tortured, not accepting their release, so that they might obtain a better resurrection. And others experienced mockings and floggings, yes, also chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were tempted, they were put to death with the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering in desolate places and mountains and caves and holes in the ground. And all these, having gained approval through their faith, did not receive what was promised, because God had provided something better for us, so that apart from us they would not be made perfect. Therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, laying aside every weight and the sin which so easily entangles us, let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith, who, for the joy set before him, endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him who has endured such hostility by sinners against himself, so that you will not grow weary, fainting in heart. Thank you for reading that along with me. I know that was long, but I think it's helpful for us to remember what this chapter is about in the context, what these Hebrews were enduring, what they were going through. And as we break some of these stories down, to remember that these people are not what the Hebrew writer wants us to focus on. He wants us to focus on something that is much better, something that is perfect, something that these people were also focusing on. This morning we're going to be taking a look at the beginning of verse 32. 4 men in particular, Gideon, Barak, Samson, and Jephthah. But first, I think it's ironic what he says there at the beginning of verse 32, and what more shall I say, for time will fail me if I recount these men. Hebrews, the book of Hebrews, is written in the style of what is often referred to as diatribe. In other words, it is a written form of a sermon. And being as such, he pulls a classic preacher move and gives his finally well before the end. He still has 2 chapters, even once he's done with chapter 11, and he's not even done with that yet. But more generally, I think he's saying something really important here, which is that this list that he's given, all these people, all the things that they've done, it isn't exhaustive, it isn't complete. He's saying that the people that he's brought up, the individuals that he's referenced, the stories that he has gotten them to recall, are an encouragement for them, for the readers, and for us, because they are not in some isolated incident. He's saying that their experience is similar to yours. He's saying that their experience is similar to ours. He's saying that something about what they were going through was important for us today. He's not saying that these are all the people who were ever faithful throughout history. These are the only people who are going to be in heaven. That's not his point. He's saying there's something important that you need to be picking up about the stories that I'm mentioning to you. And for a long time, I thought that the Hebrew writer, at this point in chapter 11, is just going to start throwing out names of individuals who did faithful stuff at random. But as I've studied this, I don't think that that's true. It seems to me to be the case that he is very intentional here, even at the end, in picking out people and stories who are making the point that he is trying to make. But that being said, these are about the worst 4 guys that he possibly could have picked. I mean, there's a meme where this guy is looking at a piece of paper and he's just really confused by it. It's kind of like this. That's how I feel when I get to this verse in the book of Hebrews. All these great men and women, these great people of faith who did these amazing things. And then we get Gideon, Barak, Samson, and Jephthah. I mean, did he even read the book of Judges? There were so many better people that he could have chosen, right? Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah. By the way, in those guys' stories, not a single bad thing is said about them. Not a single negative moment is brought up about their lives within their narratives. If you're going to talk about people of faith, why not mention them? Really, Judges was just a dark time in Israel's history. Why don't we just forget about that and jump immediately to the book of 1 Samuel? Again, he's making a really important point, I think, by mentioning these 4 men. The inference that I take here is there's something relevant about the imperfection that these 4 individuals share. When we think about these men's stories, often what comes to mind is their failures, the way that they weren't faithful. And so for the Hebrew writer to bring them up in a discussion of faith, I think should be eye-catching for us. It should make us pay a little bit more attention to the point he's trying to make. The nature of these men, the imperfect nature of these men, I think is what the Hebrew writer is trying to emphasize by bringing them up. Many of the issues, I think, that these men experienced in their lives had a lot of overlap. For instance, Gideon and Barak are both depicted at the beginning of their stories as these cowardly individuals who aren't going to rise to the occasion. You remember Gideon, he's found in the wine press, right? Not doing what you normally do in a wine press because he's scared. And when God comes to him and he says, "Hey, Gideon, I have a mission for you," Gideon pulls a Moses and he says, I'm not important enough for that, God. You don't want me. My father's clan is the least in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house. Anybody else would be a better pick than me. He doesn't want to do it. Barak is approached by Deborah with a mission from God, and he says, I'm only going if you go with me. Both depicted as cowards. Gideon and Jephthah both deal with great pride. They both thought a great amount of themselves. Gideon, by the end of his life, treats himself like a king, perhaps because he's being treated like a king by those around him. And Jephthah, Jephthah just takes anything that anybody says as an attack against him, and he won't deal with it. Samson and Jephthah both are extremely impulsive, thoughtless, and rageful. To me, I think these guys' stories share a lot of common ground. But I think the fact is that if we're honest with ourselves, I think we probably share a lot in common with those men as well. I think about passages like Matthew chapter 5, when Jesus, towards the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, talks about, "You have heard that it was said," and he references these old laws, and he says, "But I say to you," and he points out that the things that these people were participating in, that they thought weren't as bad, had the same result, had the same outcome. He says, yeah, you're making sure not to murder anybody, but you're going around hating your brethren. You make sure not to commit adultery, but you lust after every woman you see. It's really easy for us to look at these men and look at their lives and see all the mistakes that they made. I think it's really important for us to look at our own lives and recognize that we can make a lot of the same mistakes. A lot of the same temptations that plagued these individuals, I think, plague us as well. And I'm sure plagued the recipients of the book of Hebrews. We need to make sure that we're not guilty of falling into the same traps that these men fell into as we look at them and say, man, their lives were so imperfect. But I thank the Lord that faith is about recognizing His perfection and not our own. That's what we read towards the beginning and into chapter 12 of the book of Hebrews, is that the whole point of this discussion of faith is to get each and every one of us to look more carefully at Jesus. If we start thinking about faith as a recognition of myself and what I've accomplished, how good of a believer I am, then we've made a huge mistake. And it would be a huge mistake to read through Hebrews chapter 11 and think, man, look at all these amazing people and the stuff that they did. When the Hebrew writer is saying, no, they did that stuff because of God, because of their belief in Him, because of what they knew to be true about Him. That's why these people were able to accomplish the amazing things that they did, because they, like you need to, had their eyes focused on Jesus and the promise yet to come. As I read the names of these men, I thank God that He is faithful and just to forgive us. The shortcomings of these men in their own time represented the shortcomings of the nation of Israel. And when they're used here, I believe that they are representations of the shortcoming of the recipients of Hebrews. And so as we read it, I think we ought to allow them to be representations of our shortcomings. The way in which we haven't perfectly followed the Lord. But God is faithful. And when we have faith in Him, He will forgive us. And He will encourage our faith. I think about the man who comes to Jesus. Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. Approaching God with our shortcomings is not something that will bring shame upon us. But approaching God and saying, God, I'm imperfect in this, will give Him the opportunity to perfect us. And that should be what each and every one of us desires. These men are judged faithful. However I feel about them, however I feel about Samson and all of the wickedness that he participated in his life, however I feel about Gideon and the way that his reign ended, what God says about them is that they're faithful. Now, maybe for some of them, it was a moment of faithfulness couched in an entire life of lawlessness. That may be the case. But at the end of the day, when reading about those who had faith, when reading about those who persevered, who overcame, God lists these four men as examples. The Hebrew writer is by no means approving of every action that these men participated in, and neither is God. That's not the point here. It would be absolutely ridiculous for us to use this passage as a commendation of every other action that these men were involved in. And I've heard people try to do that. Well, Noah is mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11, and Noah got drunk at one point. Abraham and Rahab, they're both mentioned, and they were both liars. Even Jacob's polygamy. The only aspect of these people's lives that is commended by the Hebrew writer and by God is their faith. That's our takeaway. Not replicating every single part of these people's lives, but looking at a life that is full of sin, just like ours, and recognizing that we can still find faith in the Lord. The passage that was read for us, 1 Samuel chapter 12, verse 7, if you'll turn back over there. 1 Samuel chapter 12. This is shortly after Saul has become the king. And Samuel is speaking to the people. In verse 6 he says, "It is Yahweh who appointed Moses and Aaron and who brought your fathers up from the land of Egypt. So now take your stand that I may judge you before Yahweh concerning all the righteous acts of Yahweh which he did for you and your fathers. When Jacob went into Egypt and your fathers cried out to Yahweh, then Yahweh sent Moses and Aaron, who brought your fathers out of Egypt and settled them in this place. But they forgot Yahweh their God. So he sold them into the hand of Sisera, commander of the army of Hazor, and into the hand of the Philistines, and into the hand of the king of Moab. And they fought against them. And they cried out to Yahweh and said, We have sinned because we have forsaken Yahweh and have served the Baals and the Asheroth. But now deliver us from the hand of our enemies, and we will serve you. Then Yahweh sent Jerubbaal and Bedan and Jephthah and Samuel, and he delivered you from the hands of your enemies all around, so that you lived in security. But you saw that Nahash, the king of the sons of Ammon, came against you, and you said to me, No, but a king shall reign over us, although Yahweh your God was your king. So now behold, the king whom you have chosen, whom you have asked for, and behold, Yahweh has set a king over you." 3 of the 4 men mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11 at the beginning of verse 32 are mentioned in this verse as well. If you recall from the book of Judges, Gideon went by another name, which is Jerubbaal. Apparently, Bedan is another name for Barak, and Jephthah is mentioned here by name as well. And I will tell you, there's even a small amount of evidence to suggest that Samson should be included in this list as well. To my knowledge, these are the only 2 times, 1 Samuel chapter 12 and Hebrews chapter 11, that any of these men are mentioned again outside of their narratives in the book of Judges. Maybe that's a coincidence, but to me that says something. That the only other time that these men are mentioned, they're all mentioned together. To me that suggests a couple takeaways. Number 1, these judges were somehow more notable than the others. Even just shortly after the time of the judges, these men are who Samuel chooses to mention by name. Perhaps it is that their stories involved more detail than the stories of other judges. Perhaps they were just more well known throughout the nation of Israel. But maybe this is a part of their inclusion in the book of Hebrews chapter 11. But I think more importantly, there's a connection between the Israelites and the recipients of the book of Hebrews, which we've already addressed a couple times this morning. The connection I see here is that both groups of people were being tempted to turn away from seeing God, to turn away from focusing on God, from choosing to look at God, and to look at something else, and that's not it. They were being tempted to turn away from God, to turn away from seeing God as their king, to turn away from putting their confidence in God, and overcoming, persevering everything else because God reigned over them, and instead turn to rely on men. Maybe the Hebrew writer names these individuals as a reminder that all along, it has been God that is behind their salvation, not people. Isn't that what the Hebrews were starting to lose sight of? They were going through all these difficulties and persecutions, and the temptation was, it was a lot easier when I just did what the high priest told me to do. It was a lot easier, and my family and my friends all got along with me a lot better when I didn't choose to do everything that Jesus says, and instead just did what I've done my whole life. Listen to the people around me. And what the Hebrew writer has been stressing all the way through the book is that that's ridiculous. Because all that stuff couldn't bring about salvation. All that stuff, in fact, was pointing to Jesus who could. And then if they forgot about that, if they quit pursuing the Lord and turned back to an easier life, like the people around them, that they would lose out on that hope of salvation. There's something about these stories that fits better with the point that Samuel and the Hebrew writer are making. The way that these four judges stand out was a direct interaction with God regarding the salvation of his people. In the book of Judges, it says that Othniel and Ehud and Shamgar and Deborah were raised up by God. And that's all it says. That's how they became judges, to our knowledge. They were raised up by God. That's it. But these four individuals had a very special and direct connection with the Lord when they were given their assignment, when they were given their mission. They were directly commissioned by God, and all four of them, at least one point in their life, put clear and total reliance on him. Gideon seeking signs and allowing those signs to direct his actions, getting rid of a bunch of his soldiers and going into battle with a handful of people. Barak seeking help from Deborah. Samson asking for his strength back at the lowest moment of his life. And Jephthah with his vow. Although flawed, each and every one of these individuals, in their moment of need, turned to the Lord and put their confidence in him. I think the point that the author of Hebrews wants the reader to take away is that it can be tempting to read through to read through chapter 11 of Hebrews, to read through the Bible, and to see these faithful individuals as unattainably legendary, as acting in ways that we never could, doing things that we could never hope to accomplish. But I think the point that he's making is that it's a mistake to look at it that way. It's a mistake to read through Hebrews chapter 11 and go, Abraham, Moses, Noah, all these guys are amazing. Did those men do great things? Absolutely. 100%. Every single person in Hebrews chapter 11 did amazing things. Was it because they were amazing? Was it because they were so great? Again, Judges chapter 6. When Gideon is approached by the Lord, he says, I'm the least. I'm not worth it. They were able to do these great things only when they remembered to look at God. Only when they remembered to look at Jesus, the perfecter of our faith. And we, like they, will succeed in our mission to overcome the world and to overcome and persevere through this persecution when we remember that Christ has already overcome the world. We see that over and over again throughout many of John's writings. The instruction given for his people to overcome the world that they are living in. That's Jesus' prayer for his disciple in chapter 17. But over and over again, what is said is that the only hope we have of persevering, the only hope we have of conquering, the only hope we have of overcoming is remembering that Christ overcame. I'll leave you with one passage this morning, 1 John chapter 5. First John chapter 5, verse 4. For everything that has been born of God overcomes the world. And this is the overcoming that has overcome the world, our faith. Who is the one who overcomes the world but he who believes that Jesus is the Son of God? I can't say anything more than what these men have already said. The way to overcome is faith. Faith is a recognition that Christ has already overcome. And so I leave you with that encouragement. If you are doing your best to accomplish great things, to overcome and to persevere in this world, but you're doing it without Christ, you're missing the point. You are a flawed person, but Christ can perfect you. And so you have an opportunity now. If you have not yet given your life to the Lord, put him on in baptism. This is the time to do that. And for all those of you who have, recognize the ways in which your faith is imperfect. Recognize the ways in which your faith is incomplete. Do some searching on that. And bring those things to the Lord and recognize that only he can perfect those things. If we can help in any way, please let it be known while we stand and while we sing.